Hello and welcome again to Sport Unlocked with the lowdown on the week's sports news. Coming up, an equal pay deal for the US national teams in soccer, a first for a men's World Cup, FIFA's picked female referees. FIFA's facing new demands from rights groups, compensate for the suffering in Qatar. There's English football's trailblazing announcement from a gay male player. In tennis, Wimbledon loses its ranking points for banning Russians. There's been a big departure from the Saudi-backed golf series. And there's so much more to talk through. Shortly, we'll be joined by FIFPRO Sarah Gregorius, but kicking things off as ever, alongside me, Rob Harris from the Associated Press, Tariq Panja from the New York Times, and Martyn Ziegler from the Times. And this week, we've done a lot more than just reporting on sport. We've been playing some sport together.
Yeah, not for the first time, but it was certainly a very, very good evening playing the sport of paddle, or padel, how you pronounce it, which is a sort of cross between tennis and squash.
I never realised there was a disputed pronunciation on that.
No, neither did I. Martyn has now created a controversy where there doesn't need to be one. How very sports news-like.
So we played doubles, didn't we? And we were all on opposing teams. Me and my partner beat both you guys, actually. You're on separate teams as well, and particularly you, Tariq. You sort of had suffered a sort of crisis of confidence when you were sort of game up and 40-15 up, and then you sort of went to pieces, like you sort of collapsed. But psychologically, I don't know. You could talk us through that, maybe.
So yes, I thought we were playing with friends as well, and I'm not going to name the person. Martyn Ziegler decided to make some unkind comments, try to get in my head, and successfully did immediately get in my head. I'm now, if you're listening, Steve Peters, this is a come and get me plea. Come and help me, because we're going to get you next time, Zeeks.
This is where it's getting all fraught and the tension in it. And for those who don't know, paddle, or now we say padel, is the mix between tennis and squash. So part of it was actually just getting used to the laws of the game in terms of how the ball can bounce off the wall, which part of the wall, the glass, it can come off, and also just mastering the best way of trying to get those points.
It's probably like sort of my age and experience probably counted. I think that's probably you can't beat experience, can you? Even if you've never played before.
Well, I just didn't think there'll be a nasty edge to you, but once you get you on the sports field, Mark.
Well, I suppose at least one thing was that, unlike some other sporting events this week, we had no one disrupting the court. There was no pitch invaders, no threats as anyone confronting us, probably due to a lack of fans. But it has been a pretty bad week, particularly in England, for disorder at stadiums caused by pitch invasions that can create some great images for TV and photos at times, but are posing some real dangers.
Yeah, all these happened as a sort of celebration initially. People, getting to the playoff final or championship playoff final, or avoiding relegation. So, but it's we've had a really serious incidents this week. So, we had at Nottingham Forest, we had the Sheffield United player Billy Sharp headbutted. His assailant has already been sent to prison for that. Very swift justice. We've had similar scenes of pitch invasions at Huddersfield and Northampton, and then the most perhaps controversial and shocking one was the Patrick Vieira, the Crystal Palace manager, being confronted on the pitch, and thousands of Everton fans invaded there after they escaped relegation, and he filmed retaliating, giving a kick to the person involved, which I hope doesn't land him in trouble, because I think it's absolutely pretty disgraceful that he was targeted in that way, because actually invading the pitch is a criminal offence and has been for the last 30 years.
And the fact is, Everton fans did invade the pitch with 5 minutes to go after Calvert-Lewin scored the header that would ultimately secure the 3-2 win and Premier League survival. But the game might not have been able to finish had there been issues clearing the pitch. So that first pitch invasion, then followed by the second one, we don't necessarily see the severe punishments for this, do we? However much, we'll get accused of taking the joy out of the game and puncturing the excitement and the thrill of the moment, but you can't disrupt the game as it's going on.
No, for me, there was a couple of things. I mean, the joy and the passion of football is what makes it what it is. So, yeah, of course. But the fact that people can get that close to opposing players, opposing managers, etc. I mean, the risk that with Martyn mentioned the headbutt, that was awful and could have been even worse. And God forbid something even worse happens on a football field when you have these confrontations. So we can't have that. The other thing I noticed is we're in an era of clout chasing with mobile phones and social media, etc., and people trying to go viral. And you just think they're just sort of riling each other up, and the access to phones and just putting something on the internet. You do wonder what extreme length someone's going to do just to become famous for 15 minutes.
And actually, the person who confronted Vieira was holding a camera.
Yeah, I was speaking to somebody who's involved in football, not from Britain, who's worked in European football and English football. He was saying that it's one of the great things about English football is that there aren't any fences anymore. Obviously, they were banned after the Hillsborough disaster. He said you go around the world, lots of countries still have fences, and you can't have it both ways. You cannot have no fences and fans behaving like this. So I don't know what I think clubs are going to start being really severely punished by this sort of stadium closures, that sort of thing. At least partial stadium closures.
Yeah, and it's not a good week for Everton in terms of fan behaviour at all, because that game followed the Brentford match, which they lost. And we had two Brentford players, Rico Henry and Ivan Toney, coming out they were furious, and quite rightly, their family members were racially abused, they claimed. And again, that's just completely unacceptable as well. In this era of taking the knee, and fans are aware of, don't need to be aware of not being racist, just don't be racist. But really, the fact that these two players and their families had to face this is completely unacceptable. Again, I'm not sure enough is being done. We have campaigns, etc., but it just goes on and on, doesn't it?
It does. And as for Everton, they'll be waiting to discover just what disciplinary action they could face over those pitch invasions on the day they secured their Premier League safety. But there is a threat of action on another front facing Everton, because as Martyn broke the news of on Friday, both Leeds United and Burnley, who entered the final day of the Premier League season facing the threat of relegation still for that final spot, they have complained about Everton's finances and whether or not they breach financial rules and just what punishment they could face from the Premier League. It all centres on the profit and financial sustainability regulations that only allow clubs to lose £105 million over a 3-year period. But as we've seen from published records, Everton have lost £371.8 million over the last 3 years. We heard nothing from the Premier League yet. Everton say they're comfortable, they have complied with the rules, but certainly Leeds and Burnley both hoping there could be action, and do hope there could be an independent regulatory panel put together very quickly to look into this case and whether there could be sanctions. Who knows? Points deductions maybe for Everton. Some way to go on this yet as the Premier League season draws to a close, but certainly an intriguing one, and things getting fraught there at the bottom of the Premier League. Well, let's bring into the conversation now Sarah Gregorius. She's the Director of Global Policy and Strategic Relations for Women's Football at FIFPRO, the Global Players Union. Sarah, welcome to Sport Unlocked.
Thanks for having me.
So we've been reflecting on these security challenges for players in terms of pitch invasions. Just how much of a concern is it for FIFPRO as the global union?
I think it's hugely concerning because you're talking about player safety, right? And being safe in your work environment is an inherent right as a player, because every employee should be safe from physical violence and harassment in their work environment. So I think it's very much a union issue, and certainly something that we as FIFPRO are concerned about and really want to be in a position to help certainly our domestic unions put some protections in place around this, because I think it just is too risky of a situation for us to leave it unchecked.
Obviously, players don't want to maintain a complete distance from fans. They want engagement, but at the right moment. So is that the messaging that national governing bodies in particular need to get across to fans, that about not disrupting the games, not endangering the safety of players, or not making players even fear while they're playing that there might be a threat to them, but there will be moments that hopefully they can engage in the right moment with the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every player wants to be connected to the fans, and that's such an important and special part of the game. But certainly it has to occur in the right environment, right? And it shouldn't ever be a situation that puts anybody at risk, including the players. So I think that needs to be a very clear message, and hopefully fans can understand this, and we hopefully don't start to see any situations where anybody is feeling threatened.
Obviously, great concern about the safety of fans in particular at stadiums. Well, there was a uplifting moment across the game this week when we had the announcement by the Blackpool player, 17-year-old Jake Daniels, that he is gay. He's the first male player in English football to go public on their sexuality since Justin Fashanu in 1990. And Martyn, this is interesting because we had a story, first of all, on Sunday that a championship player was due to publicly come out, and then 24 hours or so later we had in the Sky Sports interview him speaking very publicly, very well for a 17-year-old.
Yeah, incredible actually. So this has sort of been very carefully handled and very well handled actually, I think, by Jake Daniels, by the club Blackpool, by Sky, I have to say as well, and everyone involved in him. And I think it's a really, really good, powerful moment. The only other, in fact, it's not just a sort of big day for English football, it's a big day for world football. I think there's only one other active player in world football who's come out, and that's Josh Cavallo of Adelaide United in Australia. But I think it's the right moment, actually. And I can, the outpouring of support for him, I thought, has been terrific. Lots of former players and current players. I mean, Harry Kane, for example, speaking really positively. And I actually think that the time is right.
And this was the time that Jake Daniels made the announcement on Sky Sports.
It's been such a long time of lying, and I've just processed every day of just about how I want to do it, when I want to do it. And I think now is just the right time to do it. You know, I feel like I'm ready to tell people about my story. I want people to know the real me. And lying all the time just isn't what I've wanted to do, and it has been a struggle. But now I just do feel like I'm ready to be myself, be free, and just be confident with it all. The day I told my mum and my sister, the day after we played Accrington, and I scored 4, so it just shows how much of a weight off the shoulders it was, and just a massive relief.
Sarah, how have you viewed Jake's announcement at FIFPRO? The fact is, it had been built up for so long. When would an English male player go public with their sexuality? And I'm guessing you're assessing the reaction in terms of helping other players potentially in the same situation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think last year we had Josh Cavallo in Australia also come out publicly too. My very personal response is I'm in huge admiration of their bravery and their courage, because we know that some of the problems around being authentically yourself, it can make you a bit of a target for certain things. So to Jake, we're just so proud of him, and we're so happy that he feels comfortable enough to take that step. And I think seeing the reaction, not just from within the footballing community in England, but around the world, it's hopefully gives a lot of other players courage too, to be their authentic selves publicly. So I think for us, we're just so happy that, he feels that he's in a position to make that announcement, but also hopefully in the future it doesn't get that kind of attention, because it starts to be a little bit more mainstreamed and maybe a little bit less groundbreaking in that regard. But I think first and foremost to Jake, we're so proud of you, and we hope that you are really enjoying all of the positivity that's come off the back of this as well, and I'm sure that he's really helping a lot of other people in football and outside of football.
The fact that Jake is 17 and he hasn't played, etc., or he's played a few minutes, does that make him almost like the perfect person for this moment? Because there isn't that kind of rivalry or history of this player, any opposition fans, etc. This is a young man trying to make his way in the game. Do you think it's almost like the right person, the perfect person to be the first?
And at the end of the season as well. So there's now an entire summer where he's not going to be seen playing. He will just re-emerge in pre-season, still trying to break into the first team regularly. He only had those few minutes in the final game of the season where he made his first team debut, but he was player of the youth team. So he's certainly shown promise. And in the week before his announcement, he actually signed up with Adidas as a sponsorship deal. So certainly setting himself up commercially there for the next stage of his career as well.
Yeah, Rob, you made the point to me that the story didn't last very long, which is a good sign that people are very accepting, and hopefully for Jake and his career, he will be known as a football player very soon, and not the first gay football player. He'll be judged on his talents in his career. Hopefully, be a great success, and it's something that's should be and is completely a normal part of football. That it doesn't need to be discussed over and over.
Yeah, but there are still issues in football, aren't there, Tariq? Because you reported on the case of Idrissa Gueye, the Paris Saint-Germain midfielder, who has, to my mind, really sort of set back the sort of equal rights campaign in football this week.
Yeah, and it also that story, and we'll get into it, tells you a lot about the globalization of football and where you get these pressure points as well. And this is a particular case. So Idrissa Gueye used to play in the Premier League for Everton, Paris Saint-Germain defensive midfield player. He travelled to Montpellier for a league game, and that was the week where all of the French teams are part of a campaign around the International Day for the LGBTQ community, and they would have the rainbow flag on their shirt numbers. So that's the symbol. He said he wouldn't wear that shirt, and he was dropped. And it's the second year in a row where Gueye hasn't played. Last time round, they explained it away, his people, by saying he had gastroenteritis. This time there was pretty much no excuse. He just refused to wear this shirt. And obviously a storm of controversy and criticism, quite rightly, for not taking part in this from around his club and French football, European football more generally. But across the Muslim world and from Senegal, including the president Macky Sall, he's had this outpouring of support. His name was trending on social media.
Yeah, it's also been a thing, not just people in the Muslim world. Obviously, there's in rugby union, there's a big issue in 2019 with Israel Folau, the Australian player, who he was banned by Australia after saying gay people will go to hell. That's what he said. He had strong Christian beliefs, he said, for that, and other players who were from Australia of similar faith backed him up on that, and it was a huge controversy at that time. And Senegal, homosexuality is illegal there, so you can see why it's one of these really, really difficult problems for international sport.
It's such a difficult situation because this guy clearly has that particular view, and then you saw the president of Senegal come out, and a lot of the Muslim world came out in support of him as well. In fact, his name was trending and on social media, etc., in support. What did you think of that?
I think it's really challenging, and it's a very difficult one to answer because everyone has their right to their own beliefs and their own opinions, and I don't think you ever want to take that away from anybody, but it is difficult because at the same time you want to have this very open and tolerant approach, right, and be able to at certain moments be able to celebrate communities that maybe are otherwise marginalized at certain times. So I think it's actually a very challenging one to answer. I don't think we are really in a position to provide a very binary answer in a way as to whether it's good or whether it's bad, or maybe it's somewhere in between. But I think in any case, it has already led to some very interesting discussions, right? And without getting too philosophical about, how secular should we be about these types of things, I think in any case, if you look at the conversations around what Jake Daniels has done, and then obviously now with the player and the reaction in the Islamic community, it is very challenging, but just goes to show that football in particular brings so many societal conversations to the fore off the back of what players are doing in particular. So I just think, without actually having, I suppose, the exact answer to what would or wouldn't be right in this given situation, I think it is encouraging that it starts those types of challenging conversations, because I think football as an industry sometimes hides from that. Whereas I think we do need to be confronted with it, and I think we're being confronted with it more often. And I hope that it creates space for sensible dialogue on these types of very challenging issues.
Because whether it's the Women's Euros this summer or next year, whether it's the Women's Euros this year or the Women's World Cup in Australia, New Zealand next year, we will get a sense probably globally that actually players are more open. They are actually talking about sexuality. They are talking about inclusivity as well, with a sort of a confidence that isn't there in the male game at the moment still.
Yeah, and I think maybe it comes about because, women's football and women's sport more generally is kind of used to being marginalized in a way. So I think there is kind of a space for maybe a little bit more freedom of expression, because it has sort of for a long period of time flown under the radar in a sense. I think you'll always see players in women's football really willing to talk authentically and be who they are in the public space. I think they're also learning that it doesn't come without risks. I think we see a lot of online abuse being directed at players for when they are standing up for individual or collective causes, which is a real shame. And I hope we don't see that in the exciting tournaments that are upcoming this year and next year. But again, it's just really something that we would support and encourage. And I think it's, you see a lot of, sometimes I wouldn't necessarily call it backlash, but a lot of commentary around the fact that sometimes players can be a little bit robotic in the way that they come across. And I think, to me, I'm always saddened to hear that. And I hope that players, when they see some of the positive reactions to players using their platform for different reasons, or when players are really being authentic, that there is such an outpouring of support and love that, it creates a more safe environment. Because I think certainly on social media and in traditional media, the way things can be perceived sometimes, it makes players feel that they have to sort of play a part instead of being who they really are. But I think in the women's game, we see more of that, sometimes more of that authenticity come through, but maybe it's because it's been a marginalized sport, certainly historically, for so long.
And particularly as we've seen with pay challenges. And yet this is the week where there has been a landmark moment in the United States with the men's and women's US national teams securing equal pay. Sarah, you played 100 times for New Zealand, including at the Olympics and World Cup. How significant a moment is this for women's football?
Yeah, it's massive and it's hugely encouraging. I'm so happy for what they've been able to achieve. I know it's been a very long fight that has been ongoing for many years, but it also spurs a lot of other conversations, whether it's amongst players or unions or federations. Certainly in the public space around the world, it always, I think, gives food for thought for some other organizations that may be in similar or wanting to be in similar positions. So it's massive. I'm very happy for the players, really happy for the unions, both men's and women's, that they've been able to reach this agreement. And I think, again, it sets a new precedent. It sets a new standard for what's possible. And yeah, let's wait and see where the conversation continues to go.
So it's interesting. So what they've done is that for example, the prize money pots that you get from the World Cups they'll be put together and then shared out equally. I spoke to the English FA about this, and they said that they're not going to follow this path because they think their idea is that they want the women's game to stand on its own feet, and they pointed out that sort of women's soccer is much bigger in the USA than men's soccer really, and they're much more successful, and it's a different situation. But I mean, I wasn't particularly convinced by that argument. What do you think?
There's a couple of different ways of looking at it. I think what I really like about the agreement in the US, for example, is it's equal pay, but it's also equal treatment. So it's equal play in a way too. It's equal conditions. To me, when you have federations that are of, well, any federations, but certainly the ones that are of a significant size, there is absolutely no reason for there not to be equal conditions. And I think that has to be the minimum in place, because in order for the women's game to really stand on its own feet, you have to provide the players the absolute best conditions for them to perform and really improve the product. And then the product starts to bring in all of the other benefits to the industry as well, or particularly to the federations or the organizations that would benefit from the product being excellent on the field. So I think that's one side of it. And I think the other side of it, I think some of my frustration sometimes is the fact that footballing governing bodies in particular, they're not actually there to necessarily make money. They're there to govern. They are, for the most part, set up as not-for-profit organizations. So somewhere along the way, a very active choice is made on payment structures and things like that. And I understand that money coming in does play a part to it, which is why I think focusing on equal conditions is really important. But yeah, I think you have to look at the whole picture. I think for federations of a certain size, I think it's good that they feel challenged by this. I think it's important that the FA looks at what it provides to both national teams and looks at areas in which it could equalise, particularly when they are, so financially successful in what they bring in and what they're able to provide. So without being, I mean, you could also say this about a lot of different federations around the world. I think they should feel challenged by this type of step, whether they fully agree with prize money being pulled together and it being equally split. I think it also depends on how often they are accessing those major tournaments. But I also think it's a major challenge to FIFA, right? Because one of the core reasons for like the massive inequities is because of what happens at the very top of the game and the inequities between the prize money that's paid out to the federations for competing at senior World Cups. I think that is also one of the very interesting talking points coming off the back of this arrangement, because you can see there quite clearly that one side of the game is making a far larger contribution to that prize money pool than the other, but that's not the fault of the players.
Can I ask, in terms of money in general, this idea of prize money, is the language a little bit wrong? FIFA's cash cow is this World Cup. It's held every 4 years, the Men's World Cup, and it generates however many billion, $6-7 billion. And some of the FAs, they don't all give the same amount of money to their teams. The money is the money, and it moves and is distributed in a way that the FA and the players may decide. Is the question for women's football and football more generally, how much money is allocated where? Because in order to grow the women's game, you surely need a greater pool of talented female football players coming through. And that requires investment. And my question would be, this is a great moment, etc., but putting this huge amount of money just in, almost to the opposite of what you've just said, into the top of the game, when you might want to nourish the roots more, so even more of these great American female players can emerge and elsewhere in the game, and you have this great competition for places, and have all these amazing young women footballers coming through, and without proper deep-rooted investment, you're probably not going to get that. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fair. But what I will say around sort of prize money, and I also don't like that term either, prize money in the women's game. If you look at the last editions of the Women's World Cup, many players come into that tournament as amateur or semi-professional, because the professional club game doesn't support enough players that actually end up playing at that tournament. So if you stop maybe looking at prize money and look at it as money available for competing at the highest level, then I think there's an argument that FIFA could better use this pool of money that they pay out to the federations. And you're right, like not every federation has an agreement with the players, particularly on the women's side, for them to take a revenue or a share in that prize money in the way that the US women's national team do. So that's one part. I think what sometimes frustrates me about the prize money conversation is people talk about it like the players don't really deserve it, or they do deserve, whatever the feeling may be. But the major beneficiaries are the federations. Most of them federations who have a terrible history of very blatant discrimination against their women's players, whether it's through the youth system or the senior national team itself. But they are the ones that really benefit from prize money, whatever the amount may be. Sometimes players just never see it, and sometimes players are coming in as amateur or semi-professional into those tournaments. So there needs to be some type of structure whereby a portion of prize money, whatever it may be, is actually made available, particularly on the women's side, to players, because it could be the difference between them being amateur, semi-professional, or professional, which again, if you're an organization who's running a competition, of course you're inherently interested in the product on the field being the best that it can be. That's only going to be the best that it can be if the players are able to concentrate and focus on their sport leading into it and leading out of it as well. So I think this construct around prize money, we need to go a little bit deeper and understand that the major beneficiaries are the federations in the current construct, and it's not guaranteed to players as participants. So I understand your point of view about it. We're sort of hoping for this trickle down economic effect, but I actually don't think, for the most part, we're really talking about elite at that level, because certainly our research shows us that the conditions that the players train in preparation, the remuneration that they do or don't receive, isn't what we would call elite or professional. So that really needs to be tackled as well. Broadly speaking, around, and I know I'm sort of talking a lot, but I think a lot about this. Broadly speaking, when you look at the way that money is spent in women's football and the type of investment that needs to happen, FIFA releases a lot of money to the member associations for women's football development. What they don't do is necessarily audit the way in which that's spent. And we have no idea really sometimes where it goes. We have a fair idea. Sometimes they tell us, sometimes they don't. Certainly what we hear at FIFPRO is that it's not being spent in what we or the players believe, or sometimes even the people working in the federations believe would be sensible spending in order for development to take place. So it's not about the amount of money. It's not about sometimes the figures. It's about redistribution and sensible spending and investment as well.
Sarah, that's your challenge to FIFA then here, isn't it? It's you've made a very articulate point here. The money is going somewhere. Now, if FIFA have repeatedly said they do all these audits, etc., but you've laid a challenge there for them. Show us where the money goes in women's football, and it should be way more transparent than it is. If you working at FIFPRO are not sure, FIFA claim they're more transparent than ever before. So there's a gap here. So they should show nation by nation where the money is in women's football. Is that what you're saying?
There are areas that we're concerned about, right? Like, we're a trade union. We're worried about players. We're worried about their employment environments, their training and match environments. So that really is my concern. There's probably not enough time in the day for me to worry about all of the other structures that a member association has to take care of and whether or not they're applying money sensibly. But what I will say, and I think the opportunity, it's not even so much as a challenge, as like an opportunity for FIFA in this space, is to play a role in professionalizing the women's football industry in a really innovative and creative way. And that is by globally guaranteeing that whatever the amount of prize money may be, that a part of that really is ring fenced and goes to the players, because it will be what will professionalize football in some parts of the world. And then I think we get to your point earlier about growing the talent pool, making sure the pathways are really great, and that we're developing players from a young age to progress and be the types of exciting players that we want to see on the world stage. So I understand that there's been definitely some historical wrongs, and of course I would love to have a greater understanding, but I think it's also, like, particularly with the commercial unbundling of the Women's World Cup moving forwards, we can do something innovative around professionalizing the game even further. And I think FIFA, as the competition organizer and as the global governing body, with the amount of reach and power and influence and financial reserves that they have, can play a really special role in this space.
There are those challenges that FIFA will distribute this money to the federations. They might not be even running their women's league, and there's no necessary certainty that filters down to the clubs, which then ultimately is what ends up in terms of player salaries on a weekly basis as well, to ensure that actually the money does get distributed widely across the women's game in that country, and it could largely just sit at the federation.
One other thing I would say to that as well, Rob, is, again, we have to look a little bit deeper than just the prize money, because also what FIFA distributes on the men's football side of things is insurance for clubs, this very thorough club rewards program and things like that. That's also, they don't do that in the same way on the women's side as well. So I think federations are sometimes being shortchanged, clubs are sometimes being shortchanged, and the sort of negative multiplier effect of actually not investing at the top, and what that means, and certainly on the ground, but also the message that it sends, right? If you're assigning a certain value over here to one product, and then the other one is at sort of less than 10% of that same financial value, I think there are several negative multiplier effects when you have that type of construct as well.
Sarah, thanks so much for joining us on Sport Unlocked.
Thanks, guys.
Sarah Gregorius, the Director of Global Policy and Strategic Relations for Women's Football at FIFPRO. Well, we're counting down to the World Cup in Qatar on Sport Unlocked, and we've had some news from rights groups and FIFA this week. From FIFA, they've published their refereeing list, and the most notable part of that is, for the first time, there will be female referees at a men's World Cup. 3 have been included on that list, as well as assistant referees as well.
Yeah, a big day, I think. Overdue. Stephanie Frappart from France is probably the highest profile of the trio. She's done quite a few high-profile games. She's done Champions League games, done the UEFA Super Cup. And she's going to be joined by Yoshimi Yamashita from Japan and Salima Mukansanga from Rwanda. They've also very experienced, not just in covering women's football matches, but men's football matches too. So they're going to be some female assistant referees as well. So, yeah, going to be a big change, really.
Yeah, and to be honest, makes a lot of sense. Certainly, those of us in Europe are very familiar now with Stephanie Frappart. She's done Champions League games, French League games. She officiated the French Cup final earlier this month. She was actually named in the men's Euros in 2020 as a fourth official. But however, there's a bit of still some sort of dinosaurs in football. I heard that there were people who wanted her to be named on the refereeing list to officiate in the Euros as well, but there's still some within European football circles who said they were uncomfortable with it and they had to find her a place as a fourth official. So instead, I think FIFA will have her first. I'm pretty sure that Stephanie Frappart will be refereeing a game at this World Cup, and a first for FIFA and good for them.
And there'll be a lot of intrigue to see if actually they are assigned a game involving Iran. What a moment that would be, given there are still heavy restrictions on female fans going to games in Iran.
Yeah, it's a good point. And also it's in, obviously the World Cup is in Qatar, quite a conservative place. And there are still parts of Qatar, certain establishments where there is this segregation. I remember trying to go to a restaurant with a couple of other journalists while we were covering an event there, and we were told to sit next door because we were 3 guys, and they didn't want us to sit in the so-called family section, which is also the women's section. So it is going to be interesting, both from like I said, a first that there's women, and also the location and the moment.
And also this week, we've had new demands from human rights groups, including Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, demanding that FIFA sets aside $440 million, the same as the prize money for the World Cup, to compensate those who suffered in terms of the building of Qatar. But they seem to be thinking beyond the stadiums and thinking actually FIFA is responsible as well for compensating around any suffering around the wider infrastructure as well. Is this a justified demand from those groups? Because FIFA have certainly knocked it back straight away, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's all, that's one of these things about any sort of major sporting event. It's not just building the venues, is it? There is a lot of infrastructure work that goes on usually. And if you look at the numbers, the numbers of migrant workers who increased in the population of Qatar after they won the vote, it's like basically an extra 700,000 people have arrived since that day in 2010. So clearly it's related to the World Cup.
Yeah, the population, Martyn, of the country's almost doubled, hasn't it, in the decade since Blatter opened the envelope.
It is the reminder about also the lack of detail on a lot of the deaths. Some have had more attention than others, but so many haven't had thorough investigations, and so many deaths, of course, are dismissed as natural causes and premature things like cardiac arrest, aren't they? While working in the heat.
Yeah, and I think that's the ask that is, for me, the one that everyone should be pushing on is the fact that these men have died in these numbers who are aged between 30 and sort of mid-40s with suspected cardiac arrests and these breathing, and there hasn't been an independent analysis of why they're dying. This should be done, and it's something that the Qataris should be pushed to do. But God, it almost feels like it's too late now. That pressure and that should have been a demand from FIFA as much as anyone else. So we can find out what had happened. But I guess whatever happens now, this World Cup will be sadly remembered as the World Cup that was built on the back of these poorly paid migrant workers who've suffered along the way.
And some comments by Gianni Infantino went down very badly earlier this month when he was speaking at a conference in Los Angeles and suggested that migrant workers take pride in their hard work. It all came in response to a question actually about compensating families of those who've died. He was asked the question by MSNBC Stephanie Ruhle. This is how that exchange unfolded at the Milken Institute conference.
Work, even hard work, tough work. America is a country of immigration. My parents immigrated as well from Italy to Switzerland, not so far, but still. When you give work to somebody, even in hard conditions, you give him dignity.
Pride.
And pride. It's not charity. You don't make charity. You don't give something to somebody and say, okay, stay where you are. I give you something. I feel good because I can give you something.
But to build the stadium where the World Cup is to be played.
Exactly. It's also a matter of pride. And to have been able to change the conditions for these 1.5 million people, this is something that makes us as well proud.
He's equating his own parents emigrating from Italy to Switzerland with the migrant workers who will go to Qatar from South Asia in particular, with their low-paid, very hard jobs and their tough working and living conditions, with his own parents. And these are comments that have been condemned by the rights groups, haven't they?
No, Gianni's story, his father was extremely hardworking, but he wasn't constructing a new Switzerland. He was working on the Swiss railway system, I understand, as a barista, someone who was delivering coffee to people commuting on the trains in Switzerland, and Gianni as well would occasionally help out. So he has come from humble roots, but I dare say not as humble as those people, those workers who are working in some of that searing heat and difficult conditions.
Perhaps what he was trying to articulate very clumsily was the fact that, yes, some of the workers that are going to Qatar from other parts of the world are going to be getting higher pay than they would do in their home countries, and they do get to send that money back to their families back home. But that's not the reason why Qatar, particularly with all its wealth, should subject them to tough conditions, both working and living.
Yeah, it just feels like the purest form of I suppose, naked capitalism, supply and demand. These workers paid at what the lowest amount they could probably get to go there, because it might be higher than what they're getting at home from, one of the world's richest countries. And I suppose if I was a worker, rather than being proud of building the Lusail World Cup Stadium, I'd probably want maybe somewhere more comfortable to sleep, maybe a work day that is slightly more comfortable, and I dare say maybe a bit more money that I could send back home.
Well, moving away from the world of football, and now to the host of the last Men's World Cup in 2018, Russia, and the fallout from Russia's war in Ukraine. It was in April that Wimbledon said Russian and Belarusian players would not be allowed to compete at this year's championships. Now, the All England club is being heavily rebuked by the world of tennis. The men's and women's tours say the Grand Slam won't count for ranking points. The ATP said the unilateral decision undermines the integrity of the ranking system and could set a damaging precedent for the rest of the tour if it was not addressed. The WTA said that individual athletes participating in an individual sport should not be penalised or prevented from competing solely because of their nationalities or because of decisions made by their governments. As for the All England club, they said there was deep disappointment at the decision that they called disproportionate from the WTA and the ATP, and they said it was extreme circumstances that they found themselves in. Now, sticking with the theme of Russia, but on how they corrupted sport and targeted sports administrators in the past. Martyn, you've been reading through something pretty interesting that shows how the Russians targeted the computer of Sir Craig Reedie, formerly head of the British Olympic Association, former World Anti-Doping chief as well.
Yeah, so I mean, not just a computer. So Craig Reedie has written his autobiography, and it's going to be published in a couple of months. And I've sent an advance copy. I thought I was particularly struck by this thing that when he was the president of the World Anti-Doping Agency, that there was a suspicion that a WADA, or several WADA meetings, in fact, in Lausanne in September 2016 were hacked by the Russians, obviously following issues around their doping ban. The Dutch police, the Swiss and Canadian secret services, the UK National Crime Agency were all called in. They looked at everybody's computers, and Reedie writes that he was told that the suspected hackers were led by the Russian secret police, the GRU person who was one of the two identified with poisoning the Skripals in Salisbury. So pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, Martyn, of course, the Russian hacks on WADA did give us the famous fancy bears, didn't they? All those athlete doping profiles that were leaked, Serena Williams, Simone Biles, big star athletes. And, it was clear the Russians had got into that WADA system, which makes you wonder why it was so hard to punish Russia in the first place.
Yeah, well, I mean, the book also covers that about in 2016 the WADA recommended that Russia was excluded from the Olympics, and the IOC basically effectively went to war on WADA and Reedie. And I think Reedie's book, he describes it as a vindictive approach by the IOC.
Did he suggest in the book why the IOC was running cover for Russia, why it found it so hard to punish them?
Oh, not really. No, just the fact. But there was an interesting thing where he says that he after he was sort of taken on and turned on by various IOC members in the session in Rio, he saw a senior IOC person, it doesn't say who it was, but giving an embrace to Zhukov, the Russian IOC member, to say, look, we did it. We saved you. So I think there was probably, well, we know, don't we, that the connections between Russia and the IOC at the time were very, very strong. It was only 2 years after the Sochi Olympics.
And probably just reinforcing the corrupting of sport that Russia was involved with, and the lack of contrition, and beyond that, the cover-ups in recent years, and now their pariah status because of the invasion of Ukraine. And you would hope that it's actually all brought into the consideration when eventually sport does decide whether to bring Russia back into the fold. Things like these revelations from Craig Reedie is a pattern of behaviour for well over a decade about their corrupting of sports bodies and trying to disrupt sporting activities at the governance level.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I mean, the whole issue of Russian sport has got a long way to go, and there's loads of things going through CAS, lots of other issues around sport in Russia,
and also a lot of issues around sport and Saudi Arabia. We are building up to the start of the new Saudi LIV Golf Series, which will debut at the Centurion Club in June, north of London, and yet there's been a blow, hasn't there? The chief executive of this tour, Sean Bratches, has left abruptly.
Yes. And shortly after, Greg Norman, the face of this LIV Saudi golf tournament, made those excruciating comments related to the death of Jamal Khashoggi by saying, we all make mistakes. Sean Bratches, who was the commercial head of Formula One until recently, was only in place for about 6 months with LIV, and now he said he's going to go. This tournament, this Saudi new series, just seems tainted from the very beginning, doesn't it? There's all sorts of negative and nasty headlines related to it. But there is one backer, someone who I suppose isn't going to be much of a surprise, who the identity of this person has come out in full-throated support. Former US President Donald Trump. He's lashed at the PGA Tour and the PGA of America for not giving players the releases required to play in this. he's giving his backing to Saudi Arabia, just like he did when he was a US president. And of course, the final round of this series will be played at his golf club in Miami. He said basically that the PGA of America and the PGA Tour have been taking advantage of the players for many years. He said the PGA has maximum tax exempt status, makes a fortune, and pays executives higher salaries than virtually any of the very talented players. And Liv can change that. Of course, he knows which side his bread is buttered. I wonder how much he'll be getting for the tour being played on his courses.
Yeah, Trump certainly identifying a business opportunity there, as we've seen in Spain, the fact they took their Super Cup to Saudi Arabia. And in recent weeks, we discovered more details of those contracts, particularly the fact that the Barcelona player Gerard Piqué helped to negotiate a €24 million commission. Now, prosecutors in Spain have actually opened an investigation into those contracts, and we've had more leaks, haven't we, surrounding the Spanish FA and their dealings with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and more broadly, the behaviour, these leaks are very, very damaging for the FA of Spain president Luis Rubiales. All manner of things, recordings of conversations with the Spanish Prime Minister, trying to get underhand ways, allegedly, of trying to get his people appointed to head the Spanish Players Union, having a mole in La Liga, all sorts of allegations. You know, what I found amazing is that he's managed to stay in post. It's like a story a day at the moment. And it just tells you, I guess, football cultures, sports governance cultures in different parts of the world work differently. I couldn't imagine, Martyn, you're quite experienced. Would an FA president, an FA chairman, an FA chief executive survive some of this if it happened here in the UK?
Absolutely no chance. Be out the door. Yeah, this is the guy who's going to be leading Spain and Portugal's bid, or one of the leaders anyway, for the 2030 World Cup. It doesn't sound particularly promising.
Perhaps he'd be hoping the media are all on the same team as him and the Federation, which might sound unusual, but it's something we heard from another Saudi-backed entity in football this week, Newcastle United, and their manager, Eddie Howe. An intriguing press conference, or a conclusion to one.
Just wanted to say well done. Congratulations on everybody in the North East press and the North East media. You've done a fantastic job since you came in, so well done.
Luke, that means a great deal to me. I think my first press conference, I said to you guys, try and unite behind us in our fight to stay in the league. And I have to say, it's been a couple of moments. But in the main, I think you've been very respectful. I think you've tried to help the team. And in turn, you know, we're sort of a team as well, me to you, and I think we all want what's best for Newcastle, unless there's any Arsenal reporters in here. And I think, yeah, big thank you from me back. Cheers.
Yeah, eyebrows were raised at that, and including by Paul McCarthy, the Executive Director of the Football Writers Association. Because I think there is a feeling that perhaps that journalists should be holding people to account and not be sort of cheerleaders and giving them a round of applause. However, I might be proved wrong, and perhaps Gianni Infantino's next press conference we can all clap him off the stage.
Oh, you might start a whip round for a gift as well, Martyn.
It's been good. Round of applause for us from each guys. We can give it to ourselves now. Here we go.
We know they're not doing that at FIFA HQ and they're listening to us every week, although. Well, that about brings an end to this week's episode of Sport Unlocked. In the week, we actually did play sport together as well, getting fit and active as the summer arrives in the UK. If you've got any feedback, as ever, you can message us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But for now, enjoy the sport in the days ahead, and goodbye.